Hey boys, it's 420 Dragon here. Today we're going to be doing a top 10 list. This is going to be the top 10 cards I wish were playable in the Pauper format. These, to be clear, are cards that already exist and can be played in the Pauper format, but just are so bad and do not have a home. But I wish that they did, and I wish that they were competitively viable cards. So first off, we got Sky Shroud Claim. This card is pretty cool. It is 4 mana, search your deck for up to 2 forests, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So I think this card would be pretty cool because it can get untapped forests and have them make mana immediately with basics, or you can get some of either the new duels or the snow duels that have basic land types and fix your mana with that. But I just also really love ramping and getting large amounts of mana. There's just not really any reason to use this. A lot of the things that you would want to ramp into are just mostly cheap spells. Like, you would just want to ramp into like playing a lot of cheap spells. And the expensive cards in Pauper are just really not very powerful. So this card doesn't really have much of a home. And then also green as a color is pretty bad in Pauper. So yeah, that is that. The next on our list is going to be Coiling Oracle. This card suffers from similar things to the last card, where green is just kind of a bad color. But it does look kind of enticing with the being able to put a land into play, and then otherwise like drawing a card. So it's like not really like downside. It's just potential for upside. Is if you hit a land, you get to put it into play. Otherwise, you're putting it into your hand. But I guess the thing that hurts this card is just that it has a really weak body. 1/1 for 2 is not a very strong body. It's not able to block anything. It can trade. And I mean, it can like fit into some ephemerate strategies. And putting a land there can be okay. It can be like a nice little way to ramp, but it just really doesn't provide enough power for its like fairly restrictive mana cost. It's not easy to play this, especially if you want to play it on turn 2 consistently. You're going to need to have like kind of a lot of basics. You're probably going to want to play ephemerates, so then you're going to be kind of like a 3-color deck, and you're trying to play green, but you're also trying to play ephemerate, which wants a lot of white mana. For when you get to the late game, you need to have like a couple white sources so you can like ephemerate multiple times a turn. So yeah, and I don't know, and it's just like a fairly weak effect, so it doesn't see play. You can kind of just play Elvish Visionary and have it be mostly better, easier to cast, and if you're playing Sunscape Familiar, it also gets cost reduced by Sunscape Familiar. So yeah, and then also green just kind of sucks again, so not much reason to play Coiling Oracle. Next card on our list has seen a little bit of play. Ardent Recruit here. This card has the potential to be a 1-mana 3/3, which is pretty sweet. That can be a pretty aggressive body. The problem with this card is that you want to play it in like an aggro deck, and you want like a lot of your lands to be artifact lands, right? But that gets kind of hard because then you have to play a bunch of tap lands. You kind of are incentivized to play 3 colors because in 2 colors you only get like 12 colored artifact lands. So that's not really enough to make a card like this work. And then also the other thing is like you can't really turn Metalcraft for this thing on turn 2 without like taking the turn off of playing a creature. There's not really many good artifact creatures that you can play on turn 2, or like creatures that come with an artifact or things like that could turn on Metalcraft for this guy on turn 2. I mean, I guess like the best one would probably be like Ginger Brute, which is really not a very good card. But yeah, but he does have like pretty sweet upside of like 1 mana 3/3 is just a really good stat line. So oh yeah, there's Thraben Inspector could work with it too. So that is like probably like the nut drop for this guy is like turn 1 Ancient Den this guy, turn 2 Ancient Den another this guy, and Thraben Inspector, and you hit for 3. But like that requires you to draw 2 of your 4 Ancient Dens, and yeah, so it's just kind of hard to make the mana work with this card, and it's kind of hard for it to be fast enough to really take advantage of the fact that you're getting a 1 mana 3/3. So yeah, this card is never really able to be better than like Core Skyfisher, Glint Hawk, which like are much better top decks in the late game where they're able to offer you value, be flying, and like have advantages that way, and then yeah, just like draw cards when you play them, which is just very good in Pauper. Okay, next card on our list is Arboreal Grazer. So this card, when this card enters the battlefield, you get to put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, and it's a 1 mana 0/3 reach. And similar to the first two cards on this list, it suffers a lot from just green's state in Pauper. There's just not a lot of good things to ramp into. Like, the best things you can ramp into with this card is probably like, I don't know, card draw. So like it kind of wants to be in like a blue-green strategy maybe, where you're able to offset the -1 card that this gives you because you are paying 1 mana for a 0/3 reach, and all it's doing is letting you put a land into play. It's not like returning any value to you like Coiling Oracle would or anything like that. So yeah, but the issue remains that green just doesn't really have any good top end. There's no like mid-game cards that are green that are like, oh yeah, we're really trying to play this, or any cheap interactive spells like lightning bolts or counter spells or snuff outs or journeys or like smaller value stuff like Skyfisher, Thraben Inspector. Green just has none of that. Like, none of the smaller cards in green are actually very good in Pauper. So it's kind of hard to make this card work. There's kind of just not really any reason to play green in Pauper. The next card, this will be a stand-in for a set of 5 cards. It's actually part of a cycle, is the Eidolons. I think these creatures are really interesting, and I've done a little bit of brewing around them trying to break this effect. But basically, they're all 4 mana 2/2s that have some ability where you can sacrifice it to do something. Like the red one says target creature can't block this turn. And then they all have this ability, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you may return Sandstorm Eidolon from your graveyard to your hand. So there's a lot of interesting ways to abuse this kind of effect. Basically, you can use like cards like Faithless Looting or Tolarian Winds to discard it to draw cards. You can use cards like Tortured Existence to discard it to return other creatures from your graveyard to your hand, which can be pretty sweet. But the issue with these cards is that, well, first of all, there's a couple issues. First of all, they're pretty clunky. You're spending a lot of mana before you're actually getting to get the payoff. You're having to like play Faithless Looting, discard this, and then like play a multicolored spell, and then the payoff is that you get like an extra card in hand, but it's like a kind of useless card. It's like mostly like a discard fodder. It's a 4 mana 2/2, so not particularly useful. So they're kind of clunky in that regard. You need to be having like a lot of ways to discard it. And then the other thing is that the multicolored cards in Pauper in general are kind of on the weaker side. Blue-black probably has the best multicolored cards out of all the color combinations, but in general, the multicolored cards are just kind of weaker than their monocolored counterparts. So it's not really easy to find cards that make this work and don't like aren't just bad cards. So then it's like you're kind of playing a bunch of bad cards to make your bad card work, and it's not exactly a recipe for success. The closest thing I did get to doing anything with the Eidolons was with like a Tortured Existence deck, where you can like discard the Eidolons and get back Wild Canter. And then Wild Canter can sacrifice itself to put it back in the yard for the Tortured Existence, and get back all your Eidolons, and then like you can go get some other creatures, like, I don't know, whatever you need, removal, life gain creatures, and sort of do that way. They all are, the Eidolons are also pretty good with Shipwreck Sifters, who I'll bring up here. Because they're all spirits. Shipwreck Sifters is 2 mana 1/2. It says when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. Whenever you discard a spirit or a card with Disturb, put a +1/+1 counter on Shipwreck Sifters. So this little combo has me, had me enthralled for a little bit, because I do think that there could be something there at some point. If we get enough like discard outlets and powerful multicolored cards in probably blue-black, because they already have like the most decent ones, but it could be some other blue combination as well. But yeah, so that's the Eidolons. They could be kind of cool. Next card up is Dalkin Serotark. This card is pretty sweet. It's a 1-mana 1/1. It has the ability Metalcraft and tap it to tap target artifact, creature, or land. Activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So this card can be pretty sweet. It's basically an icy manipulator on a stick. But you have to have Metalcraft, and it's a 1/1, so it's a lot easier to interact with. But I really like this card because it can hit the opponent's lands and can work in like some sort of Ponza style strategy where you're tapping the opponent's lands, maybe bouncing their lands and keeping them low on mana. But then it's also modal, so like if they land a creature, you can start tapping the creature if you have to and stop ponzing them. But yeah, I mean the issue with this card is it's just pretty weak. It doesn't do anything. It gives your opponent a lot of time to find outs to it. It's very vulnerable. Like any removal is able to kill this. And yeah, it's just generally, I mean, it can be a powerful effect, but it's just really easy to interact with, and it requires a lot of deck building restraints. Like, you need to be having a way for the tap effect to like be good, and then you also need to be playing a bunch of artifacts, and then you need to be having artifacts out, and it's just kind of a headache. Next card on our list is actually one that I've tried with Dalkin Serotark a lot, which is Crack the Earth. There's 1 red sorcery arcane. Each player sacrifices a permanent. This card is pretty sweet. I like this card. It can go with the Dalkin Serotark Ponza strategy because like you can play like cards like Ichor Wellspring, Chromatic Star that don't mind getting sacrificed, and the ideal case scenario with this card is that you're able to hit the opponent's lands, of course. So if you're able to hit the opponent's lands, it's actually insanely powerful card. It's basically 1 mana Stone Rain and like maybe even draw a card if you're second like Ichor Wellspring or something. But the issue with this card is that there are a lot of decks in Pauper that just make incidental permanents. Like if your opponent plays Thraben Inspector turn 1 and you're holding Crack the Earth, you feel so bad, and this card is just basically useless for the rest of the entire game. And your whole entire strategy is built around this card, and your deck is useless, and then you lose. And Thraben Inspector is a pretty popular and good card. But even things like the fairies, your opponent plays a turn 1 fairy, and they sack the fairy like this. It's really not worth. It's like a lot worse than Lightning Bolt to play Lightning Bolt, where you also sack a permanent. So it's just a really fragile card. It needs a lot of things to go right in a game for it to actually do anything. Yeah, your opponent plays Sacred Cat, you get you definitely are having a bad time. Yeah, so I think this card is just too fragile, but it can be insanely powerful if it does work. But again, it requires a lot of deck building restraints, and you kind of have to build your deck around it, and there's a lot of decks that just really don't care about this type of effect. Next up on the list is Capsize. This is just an old school favorite of mine. I just love this card. 3 mana, return target permanent to its owner's hand, buyback for an additional 3 mana. Buyback says, as you cast a spell, you can pay the extra cost. If you do, you put it into your hand as it resolves. And Capsize has seen play a little bit in the past, especially when FAMS was making infinite mana. Like in the Cloud of Fairies days, I did actually play Capsize as a way to kill the opponent. You just bounce all their stuff and attack, and then like Capsize can also do stuff in other scenarios when you're not going infinite. You can just like return a journey to the hand, or bounce your opponent's bounce land and get ahead on tempo, or bounce a Delver that's going to kill you, or whatever. But the issue with this card is it's just super expensive for not a very big effect. Like, you can try to build like some sort of Ponza style deck with this, and if you do get the lock, it feels awesome, but more often than not, it's just going to be like 6 mana to bounce 1 of their lands. It's just really not a good trade. Like, it costs 6 mana, it gets counterspell. Like, this is a counterspell format. You can't really just be paying 6 mana for your cards and hoping that they resolve. So yeah, that's Capsize. Poor Capsize. Maybe one day. The next card on the list is Ethereum Spinner. This card I've actually tried kind of a lot, and it's pretty close to working, but it's just really bad, man. It dies to every removal spell. It's a 3 mana 2/1. Whenever you cast a spell Mana value 4 or greater, you make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Yeah, the issue with this card is, well, there's a couple. It's 3 mana. It doesn't do anything the turn it enters the battlefield unless you're having cards like Snuff Out, or you're having enough mana to already do stuff like Flashback, Deep Analysis, or you're playing Foil. But even in those cases, it's like, let's say you play this, your opponent goes Lightning Bolt, and you foil. Like, if your opponent has another Lightning Bolt, you just like 3-for-1 yourself, and you got a 1/1 flyer out of the deal, but like, it's so bad. And yeah, so I just haven't really been able to find a way to make this card work. It's also pretty good with like the affinity creatures. You know, you play this, you play your Frogmite, you play your Mirror Enforcers. It actually helps you get up to Mirror Enforcer mana if you do have the Frogmite. But it just feels like kind of a win more card to me. Like a lot of those times, if you're drawing Mirror Enforcer Frogmite, you're probably doing pretty good anyway, and this 3 mana 2/1 just has the potential to be a big liability if your draw does not come together around it. And again, similar to the other cards, it really wants you to build around it, but it's also very fragile. So it's like, if you build around it and then it gets countered, then you're kind of just playing a bunch of bad cards, and your payoff for it just got countered or just got lightning bolted or whatever, and you're pretty sad. So yeah, and then the number 1 card that I wish could see play in Pauper is Rush of Knowledge. And I did actually try to play this card a bit, and I had decent results. It wasn't so bad. But again, you'll notice a lot of the cards on this list want you to build around it. This card definitely is in that same camp. And I noticed that the deck I was building, I tried playing like a blue-black Tolarian Terror strategy with this card, Gurmag Angler, and Spire Golem. It really just ended up being a worse version of the blue-black Tolarian Terror deck that already exists. I mean, it's super awesome when you get to play this card and just draw 7 cards, but it's really vulnerable. Like, if you play this card, you tap out 5 mana, play this card, and then your opponent, like, snuff outs your Tolarian Terror, or cast downs your Gurmag Angler, or whatever, even just counterspells this, you're just really, really sad. And, I mean, it does have some synergy with Energy Tap, because both of them pay you off for having a big creature in play, and Energy Tap helps you cast Rush of Knowledge. But again, you're opening yourself up to getting 2-for-1 by like any removal spell, and you're extremely vulnerable to counter spells. And then also, like, if your draw doesn't come together, if you draw multiple Rush of Knowledges and no creature, or if all your creatures get countered or whatever, it's just super easy to have this card be a brick in your hand. But yeah, let me know what cards you guys wish could see play in Pauper down in the comments. And thanks for watching.